it's been widely documented that the church has shuffled priests around the world. But this is the first time that that pattern has been documented in the Pacific Islands. And it's particularly significant for the Pacific for two reasons. One, as we know, the Pacific is one of the most Christian places in the world. People here are so devout and so tuned into their church that it takes on much more significance. And secondly, the Pacific is, by global standards, extremely devout. And so shuffling priests here means that they're shielded from any, if much, scrutiny.
Is there a pattern of a cover-up by the church here?
I can't speak to the church's mindset, but we can see a clear pattern of priests and missionaries moving to the Pacific after allegedly, or we know, committing abuse elsewhere. And in at least 13 cases, church officials knew that those priests and missionaries had been convicted or accused of abuse before they moved. So there was definitely church knowledge in a really significant number of these cases.
The church is hugely important in Pacific communities. Are attitudes towards sexual abuse in the church different in the Pacific compared to, say, Australia or New Zealand?
Yeah, well, in the Pacific, sex and sexual abuse is extremely taboo. And so to then combine that with, the huge affection and the huge loyalty to the church, and you have a really potent mix, that means there's extreme pressure on survivors in the Pacific not to come forward. That's true in New Zealand, that's true in Australia, but definitely not to the same extent. It's a whole different level in the Pacific Islands.
Peter, how have Pacific leaders or church groups responded to these allegations, or if at all?
Well, I was lucky enough to speak with the Archbishop of Suva, Peter Lloyd-Chong, while I was reporting this piece. And Archbishop Chong was very clear that he has no records of abusive priests being moved to his diocese or other dioceses. That's not surprising. In many of these cases, local church officials weren't told by their partners in New Zealand, in Australia, in the rest of the world. But it was interesting talking to Archbishop Chong. Even he said that, and I am roughly quoting, the word that's going round is that instead of dealing with the problem at home, those men were sent overseas. So even among local church officials in the Pacific, there is some level of awareness that that is an approach.
Support groups you spoke to in your article plan to press the Pope on these issues in PNG. Do you know how these discussions went? Yeah,
so SNAP, the Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, which is a kind of global organisation with branches all around the world, they've written to the Pope, they've issued public declarations, public requests, but it's hard for them. They've got a branch in Australia, they've got a branch in New Zealand, they've got a branch in Fiji. I spoke to the survivor who represents that branch. But again, because this is such a taboo topic, because the pressure on survivors in the Pacific is so extreme, they've had real difficulty establishing branches in places like Papua New Guinea, in places like Timor-Leste, which is where the Pope is travelling. So again, we see that culture of taboo, that culture of pressure having an impact.
Finally, from those you did speak with, what resolution do they want?
Well, in the conversations that I had with survivors and with advocates, they don't want just another apology. They say that would be great, but they want a really clear admission by the church of harm. And they want the church to proactively find that harm, to go out and approach survivors, approach potential survivors, and see where they can help, as opposed to letting people come to them. Because the latter, letting people approach them, it is difficult in the Pacific. So they want a more proactive approach by the church in reckoning with this legacy.